What did you think of Collins in the playoffs? There were people that sort of pointed to his stat line was just modest when you looked at it, but I was watching him and I came away on most games just super impressed with what he was doing because when you're looking on offense, it's an adjustment to have to play alongside Clint Capela because you're all of a sudden no longer the primary dive guy. And it felt like he was finding more ways to impact on offense, whether he was popping, even, his three ball wasn't always even falling. Then I'm watching him on defense, and there's like, this was not the case in every game of every series, but he's like defending guys who actually put the ball on the floor and have like unpredictability to their off the dribble attacks. And he's holding up quite well. And it felt like maybe overstating it to say that he turned a corner, but like this is someone that I think probably needs to be reevaluated even more because it seems to me like he's now capable of playing so many different roles, or at the very least, a player that doesn't have a ton of exploitable weaknesses as people I think thought even leading into last season.
Yeah, I mean, I think John's game has grown a ton in ways that doesn't in a lot of ways that don't show up in the box score the way you'd expect. He has gotten a ton of credit from the front office, from Nate McMillan. He's gotten a ton of credit for being a guy whose stats are going to go down a little bit, but the Hawks wins are going to soar. Because like you said, he's not that, now Trae has two guys he can pair with, like he has Clint as a rim runner. Obviously, John, that's his thing as well. I think one thing that's helped John with that, though, with that adjustment, is being a good 3-point shooter. He's actually a surprisingly good 3-point shooter. So I think that's helped his game a lot. But, it's one of those things where you are going to score less because there's fewer touches to go around. That's the thing on a winning team. You're not going to get every single touch every single time because there's more talent, there's more depth on the court, there's more talent on the court. But I think he's also improved defensively a lot. Like you mentioned him taking on guys, who are dribble driving, or he really has grown as a defender. That's another thing that's not always going to show up, and it's not always going to show up as blocks, at the rim.
Right.
But that doesn't mean he's not containing. That doesn't mean he's not making guys change their shots. That doesn't mean that he's not doing all of those things. So I personally thought the Hawks keeping John, and I thought that was a good deal for both sides. He made it like abundantly clear he wanted to stay. The Hawks in the end kept him around, and I think that was the right decision. I think his game has grown a ton, and because he's the longest tenured Hawk, so because he's been around so long, you get the perception that he's like older than he is. I think he's still a young core guy.
A puppy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's puppies. It's still a young group of guys who are really developing, and I think John is kind of a big example of that. And I think that when Clint came along, I think that he could have been, disheartened by that a little bit, just because you are going to have some personal sacrifice there. But I think it makes it easier when you're winning and you see, okay, if I do this, we're going to win, and he was a big part of that because of the way he's grown on both ends of the floor.
And it's good for them that it seems like just watching him on the court. And I know there was the reports, like, I think was it early last year? I've lost all sense of time about like friction between what he thought about Trae Young having the ball too much. Beyond Trae Young, like there are just other guys on this team now. You look at Lou Will, Bogdanovich, Gallo, who are going to have the ball in their hands. And so if you have someone who is just committed to sort of fitting in and complementing wherever he can, accessorizing wherever he can, that ends up being a huge deal, especially if I always thought this about Clint Capela in Houston. When you look at the point he was in his career, and John Collins is sort of at the same point given his age, you could want more touches. You could want to try and broaden your game. But if he really is committed to or just doesn't mind kind of fitting in and filling the gaps on offense and just depending on which lineups he's in, that ends up being absolutely monstrous for this team and their development.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you have a roster like the Hawks have, which you don't necessarily have like a ton of guys who are like, previous all-star, you don't necessarily have a lot of guys who have done that yet. But you have a lot of good young talent who's willing to be that's willing to be flexible. And I think that's what's key. And I think that's what they tried to kind of, and John's exhibit A of that. And I think that's kind of what they tried to drive home last year is you're going to have to sacrifice a few minutes. You're going to have to sacrifice a few points, but we're going to the Eastern Conference Finals. So it worked out.